Steve, I think you broke a really big story that's going crazy right now on the site. There's a big development in the Alec Baldwin saga. If you want to tell us about, what happened.
Yeah, certainly. I didn't break it. Obviously, this is
right.
ABC News did an interview with him, but I did a piece analyzing what he said because he made a very big claim during that interview, which hasn't actually, as of the time of this filming, the full thing hasn't come out yet, but ABC's put out some relevant clips. And frankly, they did it in kind of this is a side note, but they did it's like a trailer for a movie. And I find it fairly uncomfortable. A little distasteful. The way that it's just, I don't know. I guess this is a thing in TV news, right? Where you're trying to play up your big interview, but this is an interview over somebody being killed on a set. It's weird to have the music and have it done in like a movie trailer fashion. But anyway, the important bit is that he claimed to never have pulled the trigger on the gun that fired the fatal shot, which is a big claim, right? And I think to most people who own and operate modern firearms, sounds absurd and usually this kind of claim can be dismissed out of hand, right? People make this claim a lot. The gun just went off on its own. And with modern firearms or even modern replicas of antique firearms, this is generally not possible without some sort of serious malfunction, some sort of serious defect in the gun's design. And so it's extremely rare for something like that to happen. It's not impossible. Even with modern firearms, mechanical safeties can fail. This is something you teach when you're going through gun safety course, right? That you shouldn't be relying on manual safeties, right? I mean, does that, in your experience, has that been what you've been taught?
Yeah. The most important safety, they say, is your finger. Keep it off the trigger. Don't point it at anyone. We've seen companies like SIG have problems with their internal safeties failing where they're not drop safe. So obviously things can fail.
Yeah. And so I think to a modern gun owner, this claim sounds completely absurd on its face. But as I wrote on the site, it's not as crazy as it sounds at first glance, because apparently in this movie, right, it's a Wild West movie. So they're using antique firearms. Now the police have said that Baldwin was using a modern replica of an antique firearm, and many of those, excuse me, have, many of those have modern safety devices inserted into them. Generally, they'll have something called a transfer bar or a hammer block. The single action revolver that I own is one that comes equipped with a hammer block, which is just basically a piece of metal that keeps the hammer from going all the way down unless you flip it into the fire position. But there's also transfer bars, which are more common, which have the same effect of making it so the gun can't fire unless the trigger is actually pulled. But on the old style firing mechanism, which you can still get in modern replicas of single action revolvers, they don't have that safety mechanism. You can get them without it. And that's a popular way to do it because, frankly, it's perfectly possible to operate a single action revolver safely without a transfer bar or a hammer block if you know what you're doing and you follow the proper guidelines for handling a gun like that. You have to know what you're dealing with, though. And so the bottom line is that those guns with that old style firing mechanism can fire without the trigger being pulled. It's not a common thing, but it is possible. Right.
And it's my understanding, though, that when that happens, it's usually a result of something striking the back of the revolver, either forcing the hammer down or, as I think you noted in your piece, sometimes the firing pin is exposed on those old revolvers. So any sort of impact can cause that to discharge. So if Baldwin's claim is correct, what could possibly have been the scenario here where this would have had a negligent discharge without a pull of the trigger?
Well, you explained it pretty well there. Generally, the way this works, on an old single action revolver, when the hammer is all the way down, so it's not cocked and ready to fire, when it's all the way down, the firing pin protrudes into the chamber of the gun. And if you jolt it hard enough, if you knock it hard enough, let's say you drop it, or you're maybe a cowboy riding around on your horse and you're jolting that gun a lot, that firing pin can strike the primer of a live round and set it off if you generate enough force. And this is why they developed what's called the cowboy load for single action revolvers. This is why people will tell you, if you're carrying around a single action revolver, not that that's a common thing to do anymore, but if you were to do it, they tell you to leave the chamber under the hammer empty, because that's the safe way to carry a single action army, the single action revolver that doesn't have those safety mechanisms, because then you avoid the possibility of the firing pin coming into contact with that primer and setting off a round. So that's how it can happen. And it doesn't take that much force. And there's a video in my piece if people want to see an example of this happening. Hickok 45 is a very popular gun YouTuber, right? He has a great video that explains this whole thing and shows exactly how much force, or at least to some degree, how much force it requires for this to occur. And it's probably less than you might expect. It's not nothing, though, of course. And generally this happens, you'd expect this kind of misfire to happen with the gun pointed down at the ground, or, you know, when you're actually jolting the gun, you're creating some sort of force against the hammer that acts on the primer, that causes the firing pin to act on the primer. And so it is hard to imagine a scenario, I think, in my mind, where drawing the gun from a holster and causes this sort of misfire to happen, even when you've irresponsibly and negligently loaded a live round underneath that decocked hammer. Even in that scenario, it seems unlikely that simply drawing the gun would set off a round in that way. It's possible, I suppose, but not likely.
I guess
I think that's
where I was a little confused. There's just so many things in the causal chain there of what could happen, where maybe there was a mechanical failure, but the gun was still pointed at someone. So I don't understand exactly what the mechanism was that caused that negligent firing if the gun was already in a firing position pointed at someone.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it would make more sense if it fired at the ground when he was drawing it, because then, like, the sudden force of drawing the gun, if you did it hard enough, maybe that could result in a misfire. But while it's pointed at someone, when it's up pointed at someone, how do you get that force to the back side of the gun that it causes the firing pin to strike the primer with enough force to set it off? I don't know. I mean, maybe he's acting out the, fanning action, cocking a hammer, maybe, and somehow in there he smacks the back of the gun accidentally, and that sets it off. These are possibilities, right? I don't think they're likely. I think it's more likely he just pulled the trigger, maybe brushed the trigger without realizing it. Single action triggers are very sensitive. That's one of the reasons people like them, frankly. And so it's much more likely in my mind that he just pulled the trigger in this scenario rather than a hammer down on a loaded chamber misfire occurring. But the thing about the piece for me is, when I first saw his comments, my initial reaction was like, there's no way, unless the gun is broken in some way. This is because that's how it is for most modern firearms. This is not something that happens. It's something that people claim happens a lot, but it's not something that really happens that often. It's, as we pointed out earlier, there are situations, the Remington 700, there were lawsuits over that gun. The SIG P320 had drop fire issues with the drop safety in that gun not being up to par for what many people expect. There's issues like that which occur, but they're less common than the claim that a gun went off on its own.
Right.
Right. And so that's where I was, when I first read it, I was like, there's no way that this is how it happened. But when you think about it a little further, it's not impossible what he's saying. You need a lot more detail, and the police can also presumably, it'd be pretty easy for them to tell whether or not this gun had a transfer bar in it. You just look at it. It's not complicated to be able to tell that, whether it had a transfer bar or hammer block. But even then, you'd have to try and. There's not enough detail from what he said to explain how he would have caused this kind of decocked misfire on a single action revolver. So I'm still skeptical. I think it's more likely. It sounds more likely that he just pulled the trigger. Maybe he didn't even realize that he did.
Sure.
So, and then you also get into, even if it's true, right? Even if the trigger wasn't pulled and the gun fired anyway, does that absolve him of his responsibility in this situation?
Yeah.
Right.
It's an interesting point. There's still some individual culpability possibly there, even with a potential malfunction. So,
right. Because he still pointed it at Crew. There's another quote from this interview that's in these clips that ABC has released, where he says, "I would never intentionally point a gun at someone and pull the trigger at them." And as I said in the piece, that sentence goes on for 6 words too long, because you shouldn't be pointing the gun at anyone, even in a movie setting. We had an armorer on the show a couple weeks ago to discuss all these points. And there may be some legitimate claims about actors not being the ones who should physically check the guns to make sure that they're loaded with the proper ammunition or not loaded at all, as should have been the case here from what the reporting has been. But they certainly should. They certainly could have the armorer do that in front of them so that they can themselves know, and they don't have to rely on someone telling them, "Oh yeah, I checked it when you weren't around." That's not acceptable. And this scenario is exactly why it's not acceptable. Right. This is a super rare thing that's happened, but it could have been prevented if Baldwin had not pointed the gun at Crew, which you shouldn't set up a shot where Crew is in the line of fire on a gun. It just isn't necessary. I can't think of a scenario where that would be necessary. It isn't, from what I understand, talking to armors, it's not common practice. And you shouldn't accept at face value that someone else has checked a gun before, out of your sight. At the very least, I can understand them not wanting to have the actor fiddle with the gun and mess up the way that the gun is loaded in a specific pattern for the shot that's needed. But there's no reason the armorer can't come over and visibly show the actor, make them comfortable that the gun is in fact loaded properly the way that it's supposed to be. So there's 2 points right there for why Baldwin, even if he didn't pull the trigger and this was some sort of extremely rare misfire, is still culpable for what happened. And then you go down the line, he's not the only one, right? You still have the AD who handed them the gun and claimed that it was cold. You have the armorer who's responsible for the firearms on set, who would have been the one who loaded the gun. And then you have whoever brought live ammunition.
Set,
There's a lot of people still to blame for this, even in a scenario, which I, again, find unlikely, but not impossible, where Baldwin didn't pull the trigger.
Absolutely.